What's up everyone? Today we're going to be upgrading my enterprise grade NAS setup that's inside an ATX case. So currently I have a micro ATX case. And as you can see here, the wiring is a huge mess. If we had some more space, a little bit more space, I think we would be able to accommodate the hard drives much more easily, and then the wiring wouldn't be as bad as it is right now. But it still works. I mean, the case closes, everything fits inside, and this works as a perfect standalone NAS device. But what I wanted to do is that add 2 more hard drives, because I have a 10 slot SATA expander connected to the Pi5 right now, as you can see. Connected to the Geekworm X1010 right now, which is connected to the Pi. And then these are the 3D printed hard drive storage caddies, which are supposed to hold 5 hard drives, but due to the size, and I think I messed up some parameters of printing, it can only accommodate 3 hard drives without hard drives really touching and scratching each other. So now that all the hard drives are removed, we will be removing the SATA expansion card, but I don't think I will remove all of the SATA data connection cables just yet. There's no need to remove them. They will be going right back into hard drives. But as you can see, there's 10 slots right now. Only 8 are being used, so there's 2 more slots that I will be adding to this NAS build. So the first step of the business is removing that Molex connector. So since everything is powered on by this one Thermaltake non-modular PSU, I have a Molex connector powering up the Geekworm X1010, which in turn powers the Pi. However, the PSU independently powers the hard drives, so we have no need for a USB hub and to involve all these other connectors. We can directly do everything what we need using a PSU. And now I will show you how our Pi Mobile looks. So this can be made flush to any case by editing the STL, but I wanted there to be a little bit of room so that I can add GPIO cables if I needed more testing. But now we will be removing the PSU from the PSU slot of this micro ATX case and installing it to the new case. And this case, I think, came with a metal bracket that you installed the PSU in, and then plugged it in place, put it in place. So I'm removing that mount first, and then I'm going to be, I think the best way to approach this is to turn it, put the case flat on the bottom, so that when I do remove these screws, the mobile won't fall. So right now I'm just loosening them, but I will be flipping the case. There we go. Now the case is flipped and the motherboard has the Pi Mobile has nowhere to fall. So this is ideal for us. Now we can completely untie all the screws, and so I do really recommend using a longer screw, because it will essentially enable you to not damage the PCB, not the PCB, the filament of the mobile, which will allow reusability. Of course, even if you damage it, you can print a new one. That's the nice thing about 3D printing. But the pain point of it would be that you would have to remount the actual mobile on the mobile mount, which you 3D printed again. So it might be a pain point. It's best to preserve what you already printed, not ruin the environment anymore. And look at this brand new case. It's eATX. I'm pretty sure this is one of the largest ATX form factors out there. This one comes with 10 hard drive caddies naturally, so I will have to remove all of the 3D printed hard drive caddies and bays and have the raw hard drives. I will have to remove my paintings from there so that they don't fall. And just doing a little bit of cleanup with all the screws, because this case is massive and it comes with a lot of cables, a lot of screws, and a lot of wiring. But we have so much space to wire everything. It's incredible. I think I'm gonna get one of these cases for my actual desktop PC, which I use for gaming and everything else. Not as a NAS. I use it personally every day, but this case seems so nice for fixing my wiring issues. Because there's simply so much space and so many extra places where you can put SSDs and hard drives and the largest power supply out there on the market, you can put it there. So as you can see, there's a little bit of problem putting this power supply in because it has the metal bracket that came with the previous case. And I was seeing if I can still install it with that because it looked nice, but we are not able to do it, so we have to remove these screws and basically install this power supply there raw. So we will be quickly removing these screws, preparing our power supply to be entered into this massive ATX case, which I'm really proud of now. And honestly, it was $70 and it had like a 1 day delivery from Amazon. So as opposed to some of the other computer cases I've had, this one really takes the prize. It's really a badass piece. And I'm pretty sure you can use it horizontally or vertically, meaning that it has mounts on, it doesn't have mounts, but it has foots on both sides, which is kind of hard to visualize, but if you check the product out, which I will link if YouTube lets me link it, I will link it to the description. Otherwise, it's, I think, DE Rock Storage XL. And what you can see here, that I've already hooked up the power supply with a motherboard PSU bridge tool. So what that really does is that most non-modular PSUs won't work unless you plug in the 24 pin or the 18 pin motherboard connector to an actual motherboard, and that will have some voltage running in it and ground, and essentially that's what's able to turn on your PSU. So if you're using a non-modular PSU and you're not using a motherboard like I am, you're using a Pi or some or other PCB that doesn't have a 24 pin female connector, you will either use the paper clip method, which will have a metal paper clip going from, I think, pin 17 to pin to a ground pin, or pin 16 to a ground pin, something like that, which I've used in the past and it works completely fine. However, you don't really want a metal exposed in your PC build or your NAS build. It's very bad practice. So what you buy is the PSU jumper bridge tool, which is basically a little cap that you install on the top of that 24-pin motherboard connector of the PSU, so that it serves as a permanent paperclip method without having any wires exposed. So it's a perfect tool, super cheap. Anybody who's working with a PCB and connecting and powering stuff on with a PSU should really have. And when you're prototyping and checking if everything's working, the paperclip method is fine. When you're assembling the case and closing down everything and finishing up the wiring, the paperclip method is definitely bad practice. So I will also include the jumper tool and the Geekworm X10 and the 10-port SATA connector in the description, so that you can do this build yourself if you want to. But what I've done is that, see, I can instantly install our motherboard Pi Mobile easily from the micro ATX case to an eATX case without having to modify anything or remove anything, because ATX is standard form factor and any ATX case will accommodate this. And now we will remove all the hard drive caddies, the metal ones, and insert 10 hard drives into this. But I realized that we can actually put more hard drives in here if we get a larger SATA expansion card, like a 20 SATA expansion card. However, I don't know if those exist yet, so we'll have to do some research or have two Pi Mobos in here, because we can just power them with one Molex and we have more than one Molex. So I think that will be the most optimal solution. However, that will create like two independent machines in here, so you won't be able to do anything in that sense. But we will be able to pool the two machines. So a pool of two RAIDs can be as optimal. It can work. But I've counted 26 screws on this case, so it's a very hefty process. You have to unscrew all of these and then screw back in. And initially I put the hard drives facing the direction you're seeing right now. So the direction that I'm unscrewing right now, I put the hard drives facing there, so the SATA connections were exposed in that area first. And after I hooked it up and checked everything, realized that some of the SATA ports were being blocked. So I had to reinstall every hard drive facing the opposite direction. So that's a really good reminder to just install one or two hard drives, check the location, see how the wiring fits, and then proceed with the other ones. You can't just instantly go installing all of them like I did the first time, because when I visually looked at it, it looked like there was enough space for the wires to go through uninterrupted, but actually putting them in there, I realized there's a metal bracket that's blocking some of the hard drive's power connecting ports. So it's really important to double check visually and practically actually place them there and see if it works. And right now you can see those 3D printed sliders that are inserted into the hard drive's outer mounts, which allow these hard drives to basically slide into the 3D printed bay easily. And the rest of the process is basically just installing all of the hard drives into the slots. While I unscrew the 3D printed hard drive base sliders and insert them into the mechanical steel base that came with the new ATX case. I will explain a little bit about what you should pay attention to before you actually cable up all the HDDs and plug them into the X1010 and run the Pi. There's some things you should do. First and foremost, as you should with any Pi, you should go to the Pi image bootloader or whatever that tool is called, the Raspberry Pi boot config tool, which will pretty much enable you to reset or format a micro SD card and put an operating system on it and edit some of the very important configuration settings such as Wi-Fi, which network it will use, SSID. That's all three were still Wi-Fi. I don't know why I needed to repeat it. However, it will also configure things such as SSH. So if you are going to be accessing this Pi remotely without setting up the keyboard and the HDMI setting and then the mouse, you definitely need the SSH, so that's where you do it. Anybody who's worked with a Pi should know all of these, but I'm taking you through the first step. And the second step is once you do have the Pi ready, you should open the file system of the micro SD. Sorry, I said once you have the Pi ready. Once you have the micro SD ready, you should go into the file system, and you can do this through either the file explorer in Windows, Linux, or Mac. You can use anything to do this, but once you're formatting it, you should be able to go inside, edit the boot config files. And there's 2 lines of codes you need to edit in order for the Pi to actually register your hard drives, because the Pi is connected to the Geekworm X1010, which is holding a 10-port SATA connector through a PCIe X4 connection. So this by itself would be magical if it ran instantaneously on the Pi, but it's still magical that it runs with 2 lines of code being edited. Once you do turn on your computer, do turn on the Pi, and you don't see any hard drives show up even when you're typing LSBLK or any type of thing, but you type LSPCI and you recognize that the PCIe connection is being registered, however the hard drives aren't being registered. So by editing these 2 lines of code, we're able to essentially bridge the PCIe to SATA connection of the Pi. And then after that, we will see everything load up and we will be able to SSH into our build. After we SSH into our build, there is a PSU halt setting and a PSU max voltage setting that we need to edit in order for us to safely work with all of the external connections that we're doing, since we're essentially powering on a PCIe X4 connector directly through the Pi. So the hard drives aren't being powered by the Pi. As you can see, the hard drives are connected through a SATA power extender directly to the PSU, and the data parts of the, and as you can see, I'm wiping the 10-port SATA connector right now in order for it to be dustless, because it's just practice. I mean, you don't need to do that. I don't even know if it's good practice, because you might catch a thread of your clothing on top of the PCB and completely ruin it without even noticing you're working with small electronics. Best to use things that you know won't have loose threads. So that shirt was not a good idea to use. However, I'm prototyping and I have 20 of these SATA 10-port connectors because I bought a lot of them, so I can be a little bit less frugal with these, as opposed to an average person who just bought one and doesn't want it to be ruined. I can be more experimental with the way I handle it. So currently, I'm plugging in all the SATA data connections, and for me to do this, I want the motherboard and the Pi Mobo to be exactly flush with the case, so I'm making sure that there is no movement when I do pull on the wires, because I will need to pull on these cables in order to plug them into 10 hard drives. I mean, 8 are right in front of us, but two of the hard drives are actually next to the power supply, so they're at the bottom of the case, which will require a decent amount of maneuvering with the cables. But one really nice thing that I was able to find is that this 5-piece SATA power expander, and it works amazingly well. I didn't believe it at first because I thought it would split the power and become unusable. In practice and in theory, it works perfectly well, unless you're powering a very high power demand device like a GPU. I think you should be able to perfectly power 10 hard drives with this SATA power splitter. The reason I had to use this was that I accidentally bought a non-modular power supply. If I bought a modular power supply, I wouldn't have needed to have the motherboard pin and go through the paperclip method and the PSU jumper bridge. All of these things kind of arose from me purchasing a non-modular PSU. So I would definitely recommend using a modular PSU, which you can plug, let's say 5 SATA cables in. For now, split them into two SATA power cables each, so you'll instantly have room to power 10 hard drives without putting any constraints on your PSU and without having to buy a 5-piece splitter, because a 5-piece splitter, what I've noticed is that it's perfect in functionality and splitting, but when you're trying to wire it in and then shut the case, these things are solid as rocks. I mean, the bumps that it creates between the hard drives, as you can see next to each of the red cables, there is a slight bump, and that bump you can push to the left or push to the right, but there's no way to essentially make that bump smaller. So my first attempts to close the case and shut it down after this were kind of unsuccessful because I didn't really want to brute force these wires, but that was the only option. I literally pulled them, I yanked the bumps all the way to the left, which allowed me to close the case perfectly, and it still works perfectly. However, if you're buying a 5-piece SATA power splitter, I would definitely recommend you do a little bit of research into seeing how these bumps or these bubble formations will form when you're actually putting the bridged ends into the hard drives. So this is how it looks after I fixed that issue and I was able to brute force everything into this eATX case. So there we go. This is our desktop NAS. And I will show you the motherboard insert. There we go. It's completely flush, which lighter for scale, and then a screwdriver for scale. And I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you. Please subscribe and let me know what you think.